The best way to predict the future is to create it. Welcome to the Humanscape podcast, where we help business leaders prepare for the future of work now. Are you ready to bring work to life and life to work? We are. Let's go. We're back and better than ever with another episode of the Humanscape podcast from HumanWorks 8. And today, we are doubling the fun and energy on both sides of the microphone. I'm Sean Golias, the thought catalyst with HumanWorks 8, and joining me is Jason Cochran, the adaptive futurist at HumanWorks 8. And we will be your hosts today. And as a reminder, the Humanscape podcast exists to help business leaders like you prepare for the future of work now. In just a few minutes, you'll hear from today's guests, Jen Bauer and Dave Walsh of Myron Construction in Neenah, Wisconsin. We'll discuss and learn from Jen and Dave about how Myron's core value of building legacies and passion around bringing dreams to life applies to their team as well as their clients. I have seen this team in action, and I know they exemplify HumanWorks 8 value of championing people. So in a way, I guess you could say if culture were construction, they build excellence. But let me give you a little bit about Jen and Dave before we begin the conversation together. Jen's current role is the Senior Vice President of Marketing and Culture, and she's responsible for the oversight of marketing and the culture strategy, corporate communications, branding, creative development, public and client relations, and event planning and execution. And as you can see from that list, she is hands-on and has the Myron touch when it comes to people. Dave serves as Executive Vice President of Human Resources for Myron, and he leads Myron's commitment to ensure team members feel valued and engaged. And let me tell you, he is all over that. He has such a unique brand of candor and energy and passion. I can't wait for you to meet both of them. So let's get this party started and bring Dave and Jen on. Welcome, Jen. Welcome, Dave.
Thank you.
Happy to be here, Sean and Jason.
Fantastic. Well, I'm not a big bio reader, as you can sort of see, but I want to think, I mentioned a little bit about what you do, but what's one thing from your bio that I didn't mention that you're most proud of, whether it's personally or professionally? Anything come to mind that way?
I guess my bio, or the one piece that's not in there, is the Latin phrase cura personalis, care of the person. So that is probably the most important thing. It comes to me from my parents, who were a physician and a social worker. But cura personalis, it's the theme of every leadership class I teach. So I should probably add that to my bio because it'd be a lot more interesting than being the Executive VP of Human Resources.
I love that, Dave. And that's you. That's how you live. Jen, anything? What didn't I mention from yours?
Sure. I think, you talked a lot about the different areas of the business that I have the opportunity to touch, but I think the thing that I'm most proud of is the team I've built. So it's been incredible to witness the growth at Myron over the last 20 years, and having a part in bringing people onto the team and watching them excel and shine has been phenomenal.
And your team does that. Wow. Talk about a team and with the energy and spark that they have. I've seen them in action, Jen. Something definitely to be proud of. Before we get into your role and what you're doing at Myron, it would be interesting, I think, for our listeners to sort of get a little sense of how did your path start and how did they end up today focused on people and culture? Anybody want to kick that off? How did you end up where you are and where you're sitting today?
So as I mentioned, I've been with Myron for 20 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Congratulations. That is amazing.
Thank you. It's been crazy. I think when I started, to come in at an entry-level position, I was a year out of college, didn't have a lot of experience, but got the opportunity to be involved in a lot of different aspects of the business and to watch it grow. And I think watching that evolve, and as I mentioned, helping build the team has been one of my favorite parts of it. And I think taking on this culture role in the last couple of years has just been a way to amplify that influence and impact I can have on the business. I've seen what creating a healthy and thriving culture can look like on a team level, and then trying to implement that across the organization is really where I'm finding my joy and excitement these days.
Fantastic. Dave, how about you? How did your path bring you here?
My path is a little different. So I spent the first 20 years of my professional life as a police officer, both in California and Wisconsin. At Cura Personnel, it's been in a very different way. when I was done with public service, I'd done my 20 years. I was ready to do something different. Myron was looking for a people person. I was looking for a people challenge. And the two paths crossed. Since I was the first full-time HR person Myron had. And since then, it's really been about, we've doubled, then tripled in size from when I joined. And it's really been about figuring out how to best serve and be of service to the people here while still finding new people and retaining the people we had. And then you use the phrase partner in crime, but Jen has been my partner in crime in terms of finding the right cultural fit and then using that culture to make sure people feel valued and engaged.
So Dave and Jen, you've both been there. You've been doing a lot with Myron over the years. I got to ask this question, especially for those of our listeners who may not quite be as familiar with a lot of the landmarks and cool things in Wisconsin. Could you name a few of the projects, some of the cool construction things you've done? Like, have you had an opportunity to work on Buck Stadium or Lambeau Field with the Packers or the Brewers? Any cool projects to share with the listeners?
So I will touch on one of our biggest that we're very proud of, formed a partnership with the Green Bay Packers over the last, it's been about 15 years now that we've pretty much been ongoing doing work at Lambeau Field. And the reason that I chimed in on that project is Dave is a Bears fan. So while most of the team at Myron is extremely proud to be partnered with the Packers and to have a chance to be there on a regular basis, he's got a little more heartache about that.
Dave, how do you feel about that?
Quite true. It is painful. It's painful to have to go on tours and to smile and say, great job, this is very exciting. But it does part of my interview process, actually, is I made sure I wouldn't have to become a Packers fan to be a Myron employee. It is funny. So the Packers is by easily our most famous project and something we're very proud of. But I bet we've touched at least a third of the schools in Wisconsin. So if your kids go to school, the odds are at some point or another they'll go to a school that Myron's had a piece of. Most of the UW campuses we've done a lot of work on. So if you go to higher education in Wisconsin, we've done a lot of work there. We do everything except roads, bridges, and residential. So we don't generally build houses or apartments, but boy, we build everything else. And Wisconsin's about 60% of our business. So in Wisconsin, northern Iowa, the UP of Michigan, you've probably seen a Myron truck drive by you at some point.
So let's talk a little bit more about Myron. Aside from the cool projects that you work on, let's dig a little bit more into the culture side of things. There's been a lot that's happened over the last 4 to 5 years, right? We're not going to belabor talking about COVID, but it was a major tipping point for a lot of organizations. How has both of your thinking and action around Myron's culture changed? Maybe over the last few years, any things you can think of, put your thumb on where the culture has changed over the last few years that you want to share?
Well, I guess I'd like to use the example of we recently remodeled our corporate office. And it was so fascinating to me because we built this office in 2002. We did our first remodel in 2008. And then, as I said, just finished up another remodel. When we did our remodel in 2008, the entire focus was on our clients. So it was about creating a show place to bring people in, explain what we do, how we do it, why we do it. But it was very externally focused. And I thought it was fascinating that when it came time around to do this last remodel, to hear our owners talk about the fact that what they wanted to do with this latest version was very employee centric. So it was about creating a space that people wanted to come to work and creating flexibility in an environment that encouraged collaboration, and just hearing that shift in a matter of a decade. And I think COVID had a lot to do with that, people working in offices versus working remotely, and knowing that if we want to attract the top talent, we needed to have a workplace that would be desirable to people. But that's something that I've definitely seen, that focus from, and again, and I know a lot of people say it, you take care of your people, they will take care of your clients. And to see that shift internally has been really cool to see.
Quick follow-up on that, Jen. Maybe one particular detail, one thing maybe around that's changed with that. How did that environment change to be focused more on the employees? Can you share one thing that maybe changed in that physical environment to do so?
I think we've created a lot more flexible touchdown spaces. So it's much more common now to see our employees working in our kitchen, working out in our beautiful quarry work, our kind of patio area. That piece of it, just knowing that people maybe don't want to always sit at their desk and want a different environment to work in.
I think those are great comments, Jen, but I think you're too modest. The other piece of what's changed with Myron is that we've given voice to culture. So 5 years ago, there wasn't a VP level. We didn't put one of our most talented executives in charge of culture. But now we've picked that and said, we're going to ask this person to concentrate just on culture. And she's put together a culture team and culture, and we've done a bunch of different other things for culture. But I think giving it a name and giving it an executive sponsor is an important piece. You mentioned COVID. Jen was on the COVID task force. By the way, we had jackets and they were smashing. So I'm really sad that the COVID task force doesn't exist anymore. But Jen was on the COVID task force. I was there because it was talking about the mechanics of human resources and benefits and that sort of thing. Jen was there because we were talking about the culture of Myron and how does the culture of Myron survive a pandemic and survive when people went home for a while and then had to come back to work. So giving culture a name and an executive sponsor is one of the most significant things I think the owners have done here to really round out and figure out what the culture of Myron really is.
So a COVID task force, I got to admit, this is the first time I've heard this. So in actual uniforms. So you got to spill a little bit of the beans here, Dave, in terms of what was involved with that. Was it kind of a joke or was this something serious in terms of there were some tasks and responsibilities?
I wish it was a joke. It was a regular meeting we had because it was so important to us. We were in uncharted territory and a lot of people, we didn't know whether we'd be working, whether we'd be shutting people down or cutting off pay and all that stuff. So we put together a lot of different contingency plans. But Jen, again, remember, her role is culture and to keep people engaged, bought the core members of the COVID task force, a jacket that says COVID task force on the back. And I wore mine proudly. That was probably a little bit more of a joke. But as a matter of fact, just this year, we were figuring out records for the COVID task force. And Jen and I, once again, donned proudly our COVID task force jackets to round out the COVID experience.
For probably about a year and a half, we met daily talking about policies, what we were going to implement, and a lot of it focused around communication. So I think for about a year, we were sending out almost a daily COVID newsletter that was just trying to keep our employees informed. Obviously, we have employees throughout different offices in the field, and we wanted them to know that they were being thought of and cared for, and every decision that was being made was well thought out and talked about. So that was definitely a big part of our life for quite a while.
So, Jen, with Dave saying that focus on culture, having somebody just sort of be the front stage person really leading that charge, and I've seen you and your team do that so well. What have been some ways or some focus areas, components that you've focused on to elevate culture over the last 2 or 3 years there at Myron?
Well, I think one of the biggest things we did, and you and your team at HumanWorks were a huge part of it, was developing our core values. So coming out of the pandemic, I think it was in 2021, we kind of made the decision at the end of 2020 that we had company drivers, but while they served us well for many years, they no longer felt truly authentic to who we are. And it felt like a lot of them could be applied to any company you talked about. And so we made the decision we wanted to revise those and really understand and have that bubble up from the employees. But we knew that it was going to mean more to our team members if we brought in a third party to help validate that and help us through that process. It was not something we'd ever done before. I think the last time our drivers were determined, there was a group of us that sat in a conference room and talked about, what are some of the values that might be important to our clients, but not necessarily what makes Myron different. And so we brought HumanWorks on and we went through, I think we did about 13 listening sessions with 120 of our employees, everyone from line level to executive and owners, from our yard operations, our field operations within our offices, really to hear from them what makes Myron. And being able to bring about those words and have common language around what is important to Myron and what makes us special and different has just been incredible to share with our employees. And to me, the best part is when I hear employees talk, like that is part of their daily conversation. Like, in that situation, everyone rallied together, or we really built legacies for that client. And every time I hear that, it puts a smile on my face because, again, it was always there. And I think it wasn't that we created these things. We just gave a common language to it. and a way for employees to talk about it and celebrate what makes us different.
That's really exciting. And I want to share, Jen mentioned at least a couple of their values. I believe your values are really, really strong. And it was great hearing this language, as you said, come from your team members. It wasn't made up. They were living it and they just put sort of words to it. One of your values is stay grounded, which is probably my favorite, if I have to say. I don't know if I've ever shared that with both of you, but that stay grounded one is one of my favorites. Think big, rally together, which you say you hear team members talk about. Dig deep. And that one of what you're all about is that building legacies, both for your clients as well as for your team members that way. 5 strong ones. And you said you've heard them used as part of your language. I believe when I've been there too, I've even heard that you hear them even out in the field or out on a project from, people actually building. Is that true, Dave, Jen? Have you gotten feedback that way?
Well, certainly they're part of the language of our field as well. The field wears them proudly. You'll see, it's fun to watch. We have high-vis T-shirts that have our values emblazoned on them, so they're good reminders to everyone out there. When people apply to jobs at Myron, they quote our values and say that's part of why they're applying to Myron, because those values resonated with them. And they felt that desire to build a legacy or that desire to stay grounded. And that's so exciting to hear when you come through. It's sort of a check mark in my world that says, okay, this person understands us, and it helps us move that person farther along in the process.
And have you incorporated the values and that language in any other of your actions or ways you're looking at culture and elevating it?
Yeah, so after we unveiled the values, kind of the part 2 to that was we developed a new employee recognition program, which we call Recognize It. And really, it's an opportunity for team members to recognize fellow team members for living out our core values on a daily basis. So we have small cards that have a little pin on them and a helmet or a hard hat sticker, which are very big in our industry. You'll see on project sites, hard hats are covered in them, whether they're project related or training related. And so all it is it's when you see someone who's doing something that either meant something to you, you saw them do their job with excellence. It doesn't need to be a gigantic act, but just trying to create that culture of gratitude. All you do is put your name on it, a short message, the individual's name, and you can hand them that card, and that can be the end of it. Otherwise, we have a spot on it where there's a QR code, and you can upload your story online. And that allows us to be able to broadcast those stories company-wide, whether it's on computer screensavers or digital signage or on the web portal. And then that enters, if you do share it publicly. And we also do want to encourage people to be recognized the way they like to be recognized. So some people love public recognition. They love having their name in lights. Other people, just having one person one-on-one say thank you to me, that might be all I'm looking for. So people can upload them and choose whether or not they want it to be broadcast or to just kind of go into our library of stories. But when they do that, then they're entered in a quarterly drawing to win prizes, because what we really want to do, we feel like getting the gratitude is a gift, but we also want to incentivize the time it takes to show gratitude. So that's why we recognize individuals who actually take the time to give out gratitude and express appreciation.
And the response from the team, I remember hearing measuring, you measure how many people were involved. And I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jen, Dave, that from what you were doing before until you rolled out the Recognize It, the increase in involvement was just spectacular. It was kind of amazing.
Yes, we did have a recognition program prior to this, but I think it was a situation where it kind of got to that point where people felt like they needed to save a baby from a burning building to be able to achieve one of that type of recognition. So we track it obviously on a quarterly basis. We don't have an idea necessarily of how many cards are just given out without the uploading, which Dave might want to speak about a little bit too, because that's kind of more his way of doing things. But I would say on every 2 to 3 months, we have at least 100 instances of recognition uploaded online, which is phenomenal.
That's a big number. Let me tell you, when we talk to a lot of organizations, they would love to hear that number. And Dave, what would you add? The listeners couldn't see your arms going to chart. Yeah, I got this. But what was that?
So I tease Jen. I never put myself in for the drawing. I'm a quiet guy, so I don't like to be recognized. I don't like people to see my name. So I just kind of sneak around and give people their cards without taking pictures. Although at some point I want to put my name in because I'd like a Myron Values T-shirt, but that's another story. I think the last thing with values, and we used to just start meetings with a positive moment, right? Which is fun. You know, I had a great weekend. My kid did this, that, and the other. But now we start, and especially our executive meetings, we start with show us the way that you saw the values in action. So I just think that's such a powerful thing for folks to have to think about it, and then to share that story with the other executives or leaders in the company. Then, Sean, you taught us this. My favorite part of that is then we ask someone else around the table. So if Jen tells a story, I asked Jason to reach out to the person Jen told the story about and tell that person they were mentioned in the meeting. I do that all the time now. Even if we forget to do that piece, I say, hey, Jen mentioned you in the meeting and she was so positive, and it just blows their day up. So I think the values have been a core of how we operate, and they touch these little pieces and parts. For sure, the Recognize It program, but they come into meetings, and then the meetings we leave, and we are sort of gently encouraged to recognize people without the formal program. The values have been a transformative part of how our culture exists.
Well, that's so great to hear, and that's all because of the work and the focus both of you put on them to keep them alive. You know, that is our bottom line. You've got to keep those values as a living language, and you're giving specific examples of where that's happening there at Myron, and that's so exciting. So, what's next? Like, you've talked about, looking back, that's been a big thing, the values language and the recognition. Is there anything on your horizon as you think about strategies moving forward, or other parts of culture, or looking at people that you're trying to elevate? Anything on either of yours horizon, or that you're working on now that you'd want to share with listeners?
So two pieces. One, we're right in the middle of implementing what's referred to as our accountability chart, right? The ownership is transitioning. One of our owners is preparing to retire. One of our longtime, very vivacious and well known and thought of owners is retiring. So we're transferring to the next generation of ownership. And that has left a lot of people feeling like they're going to be a bit adrift. So one of the things we've done is created this accountability chart where we clearly spell out accountabilities, and we're right in the middle of that process. So we're in our first year with the new accountability chart. I won't say it's without hiccups. I will say there have been a bunch of interesting meetings, but it's been a very good process of helping people understand where their lanes of traffic are and who they reach out to when they need help with lanes of traffic. I think that's been great. So that's sitting there, and it's involved job descriptions and that sort of thing. So when I think about transition of ownership, of leadership, that's an important piece of the world to me. I think the other thing is we're a very young organization. When we talk about our project managers, the people who help us build buildings, it used to be most of our project managers are 15, 20-year experience folks. Now most of our project managers have less than 5 years experience in the industry. That's a huge difference considering our average project size was 2 or 3 million back 10, 20 years ago. And now we're building 100, 200, $300 million projects. So I think that's the other struggle for us is how do we formalize our training program, speed the training process, provide mentors so those people feel valued even as we're pushing them to learn. I think that's what Jen and I are really working on this year and at this time to keep moving forward. And that's a company-wide effort, but the Human Resources Marketing Task Force is working on that. Our Learning and Development and the Culture team is working on that. It really does kind of sprinkle through the whole company.
With that, Dave, any ideas of how the values piece in particular, how do you think the values will matriculate into kind of developing those mentor programs for folks, particularly the project managers?
Yeah, so it's interesting you mentioned the values. And again, I mentioned them serving as a core or sort of the base of how we do things. So we are providing a training program for our mentors, of course. And part of that training is actually a specific couple of hours on just the culture of Myron. And the culture of Myron involves the story of how we got the values, how the values live out, how to keep them living out. I don't think when I first started here, we would have ever had a course or a couple hour training piece in any of our trainings about culture. But now that and the values in particular are a part of how we do things.
I love that you're not leaving anything up to chance. I can't tell you the number of times I've heard very successful organizations that'll say, well, folks will just get it organically or by osmosis. They'll feel the culture, they'll start to assimilate and become a part of it. I love that you're explicitly teaching it and calling it out and that it's a component there. of the mentoring program that you're putting into place. Just another way that you're leveraging how important those values really are. So another question for you and Jen is kind of sticking with the values still, but I want to flip this now toward the future. We talked a little bit about, mentoring. That's one of the things on the horizon that you're going to be doing. But obviously, all of us that have our ears to the world of business and economy, there's a lot of change going on right now. Every week, we're talking about artificial intelligence and advances that are happening that way. Here's my question for both of you, and maybe Jen, will start off with you on this one. In addition to the mentoring and helping the project managers, what are some of the things that are top of mind for you around the future of work? And when I say that, I mean, like, in the next few years, what are some things, some conversations you all are having at the highest level of, these are some things we got to figure out about how the world is changing, how the world of work or construction is changing, that you're starting to put your heads to and think about?
No, definitely. And I think, traditionally construction has been an industry that is often a little behind the pack when it comes to adopting new technologies and new ways of doing things. I think we're proud of the fact that we're often traditional and that we have a longstanding history of just how we get the work done. But we have, in the last couple of years, we now have an innovation team that meets monthly to talk about new technologies, new ways we could be working. AI is definitely a conversation we've been having. I think the biggest thing is really trying to figure out how do we harness it and make it work for us. But I think we're also looking out in the field of how can we make work better and increase well-being for our employees. One of the things we've recently purchased, they're called mules, material unit lift enhancers. And so for our masons, and masonry is backbreaking work and heavy lifting, and it's hard on the body, hard on the spirit. But these allow our masons to do, more work with less harm on their body. So I think the more we can investigate technologies that can make our team members' lives better, more efficient, more productive, I think that is really kind of where we're focusing our efforts. We're also in the process of investigating a new ERP platform for our company. As our company has grown, we've always been very proud of the fact that we've built a lot of our platforms internally. But as you try to scale an organization and you need your systems to talk to each other and integrate and work well together, we're kind of coming to that realization that it might be time to take that next step and find a platform that will work better and speak to each other better and just be able to make all of our departments more integrated and kind of help to continue to break down some of those silos that tend to exist.
Boy, those are some good examples. And you stole my ERP piece because I do think that's an important part of what we're doing. So I'll shift to the people part. So my future of work concern is who's going to do the work. There aren't robots out there that can do masonry right now. There's not a lot of automatic putting up steel and precast. It's still people that have to do the work. So a couple things, and again, Jen and I partner on this. One is we've put forward an allyship program. Traditionally, construction's been white, male, maybe doesn't seem as welcoming as the world might put forward. So we've tried to teach our folks how to be allies to those who are different or might not feel as comfortable or might not feel welcomed to the company. That's been really successful. I think we're going to continue to grow that program and try and help it morph into something more about being a positive bystander. The other piece is build like a girl. 50% of the population is female. 3% of the field population in Myron is female. That's a bit of a hole. We spent a lot of time trying to think about how to bring women into the fold. And one of the ways we do that is teaching girls, and just girls, in a safe setting, mentored by women in the construction industry, how to build. So what it looks like to pour concrete, what it looks like to stack brick and block, what it looks like to operate a crane. Those are really fun days because the girls come in and they're nervous and they're quiet and they're kind of holding on to themselves. And then they come back later and they're cursing and they're spitting on the floor and they're chewing tobacco. And I'm like, holy smokes, what happened in the 3 hours? Well, maybe they're not doing all those things. But I mean, they really are. They become transformed. So Build Like a Girl is a unique way we're doing this. We're just trying to find ways to increase our workforce because we can use as much AI as we want and all the things that we do in the office. But the reality is 1,200 people build buildings for us. And beyond the mule, which is a great example, Jen, beyond that, we have to find ways to just keep bringing those bodies into the fold.
I love that. And I love that you're breaking down barriers as you're innovating. So you've got an innovation team, you've got an allyship program, we've got Build Like a Girl. You all are leading the way on thinking about the future of work well. Here's a smaller question. I'm just curious for both of your perspectives. Have either of you dabbled with Chat GPT? Have you done anything with it, like help writing speeches or copywriting or anything, emails?
Yep, that's exactly how I've used it. You always have that initial part of trying to start from nothing, and I found that it's a great way to at least get the creative juices flowing. So different times when I have to write speeches, I'll just kind of put in a prompt and see what comes back, and I feel like what I end up with is very different than what is spit out, but it got me started. So it's definitely a fun tool to play around with. I think for us, we're just really trying to figure out how do we continue to capitalize on it, because I feel like every day I read a new article about how people are using AI, and it's fascinating. But it feels like right now this gigantic thing, and how do you get your arms around it and decide what you're going to use? And I think also there's always the security concerns. So hearing from our IT director about how many times our firewall is hit in a day, that's a bit terrifying. And to know how much we rely on technology, and if your systems are taken down, what that could mean. So I think just trying to find that balance between being curious about the technology and also protecting ourselves from what it could open us up to.
That's so wise, Jen. Balancing that curiosity, but also being safe and secure. And it's got to be helpful to have a team that thinks that way, so that you don't go too far either direction. You don't want to be left behind, but you also don't want to be on the bleeding edge of trying things and then having some collateral damage to clean up. Before we kind of pivot away from that, Dave, how about you? Have you tinkered with like Chat GPT, Claude, Gemini, any of those with anything that you've done?
I'm sorry. Did you see how long it took me to log on to this meeting today in and of itself? The short answer is
I got you, Dave.
Jen will show me some of her fancy Chat GPT stuff. But no, that's not my specialty. I'm much more pick up the phone and call a guy and write it down on a piece of paper. So Jen's dragging me forward bit by bit, but I rely on her to push. I'm not the pusher there.
And Dave, I get you. It sounds like we're doubling down. It sounds like Dave and Sean would be on one camp and Jen and Jason would be in the other camp. That's how that would be.
It takes all kinds to make a world.
And thank goodness we have some of both. You need that balance. There you go. As far as that goes, you need that balance. Well, you've talked so much about all the great things you're doing with culture. Is there anything we didn't ask you that you're doing, or why, I always say, why Myron? It's such a fantastic place to work, to grow and thrive. Is there anything else that you wanted to mention around what you're doing with people and culture that would answer, hey, this is why Myron moving forward?
Boy, it's interesting to hear you say why Myron. That's a great question. And it's a question we get all the time in the interviews, because I want to know why they picked Myron in the first place. And I'll tell you why I think Myron's different. Aside from the fact that we have a senior VP of culture and the work that she and her culture team have done, what it really is we have made an effort, and it's intentional from the owners, from the recruiting we do. We've made an effort to hire really driven, motivated, we call them type A, competitive people. And then I tell people, a rising tide lifts all boats. So because the people here are so talented and we're so careful, Jen mentioned her team, holy smokes, you literally have to give blood and then make sure that you've been x-rayed before you join Jen's team. Maybe not literally, but close to that, because we're so thoughtful about who we hire. But then once you hire, the rising tide lifts all boats. You want to do better for your fellow employees. You want to be the person that they're giving a recognize it card to, because it gives you pride to be able to make those people feel impressed or what have you. So I think why Myron is it's just a different way of approaching construction. It's a different way of approaching the people. Our owners, so what, we're a $1.7 billion company. Our owners still interview almost everyone that comes to work for Myron. Now that's a huge pain when you're trying to schedule interviews, but it's such a powerful comment on, hey, you're going to put a Myron jersey on? I'd really like to get to know you because I own the place, and then you're putting my name on the shirt. Today we're doing the Myron Way, a day-long program where they talk about how Myron does things. And the first 2 hours of the Myron Way is the owners giving their story and why it's important to be Myron. I think the why Myron is, we just approach it a little differently. And I think the values are another good example. 5 2-word values that talk about things. Holy smokes, that's a pretty cool thing in my world. Not a lot of blue-collar construction companies are out there doing those things.
I just wanted to chime in on, I think it's about the type of people we hire in the sense that they're very driven, but I also feel like we hire people who care a lot. One of my favorite values really is rally together, because I don't know of many organizations. You always hope that you have the type of people who are going to be there for each other, but seeing how our folks have rallied around someone who's going through a health crisis or who has lost a family member, and really stepping in when they see someone who's overwhelmed. What can I do? So there's a couple of things there. One, and Dave is the best at this, we talk about the fact that weddings are optional, but funerals are mandatory. So the time when someone really needs people to be there is when you've lost someone. And we've had multiple employees who have commented on the fact, and their family members have commented, how many Myron folks come through the line at a funeral of a family member. And seeing their coworkers and team members there for them in those trying times, I think those are the times that you want to work extra hard with the individuals, because it's like, gosh, you were there for me. And then we had one, at the time they weren't a huge client of ours, but they had an issue at their facility, and it was on Christmas Day. And they called their regular contractor to come in and help them out because something had gone wrong and they needed it fixed immediately. And that contractor said, I'm really sorry, but it's Christmas Day. We're not going to, we just can't help you out. So they ended up calling us, and we talked to some of our team members, and they're like, tell us where you need us, when, and we'll get the job done. And a great relationship with the client was actually formed out of that. We do a lot more work with them now, but I think that's just the attitude of a Myron employee. Like, if something needs to be done, yeah, tell me when and where. Like, I'm there to help, and I know I'm going to have team members around me helping me do it. And even in a bad situation, we're going to make the best of it.
Wow. Well, you said, Dave, that it was a long answer, but it deserves a long answer as far as that goes, because of all the good work you're doing. And I want to sum up some of that good work, but before, we love to just find out a little bit about you. We call it the 3 parts of the mind segment, focusing on smarts and intelligence and the cognitive part of both of your minds. What's a hidden talent, a skill, something you're smart about that I don't know about, or maybe the world doesn't know about? And it can be professionally, or it could just be something personal that you have a passion around. Anything that comes to mind? Jen, Dave, who'd want to share?
So one talent I have that I was a very introverted, quiet kid. And one thing I taught myself was how to do origami. So there are still times you will still find me in meetings, and it's not because I'm not paying attention, but just because it's almost a way to help focus, that I might be sitting there folding a piece of paper. But yeah, it was just something that I kind of became fascinated with when I was in elementary school. And we had wonderful librarians who were great at tracking down books. And yeah, so that's something that I still every once in a while pull that out. It's a fun little party trick.
Origami. And Dave?
I'm a ballroom dancer. So I took ballroom dancing at college as a lark, and then joined a club. So I can foxtrot, rumba, tango, waltz, polka. Yeah. So as I've taught all my children how to ballroom dance. So you look at me, it screams ballroom dancer, I know, but yep, I'm a ballroom dancer.
Well, when both of you lead those, wellness sessions around origami or ballroom dancing there, Myron, I want to be invited, because both are skills I do not have as far as that goes. I'm intrigued. And how about, your affective part of your personality? How about a favorite? Just something favorite of both of yours. And I'll start with Dave. What's a favorite, I don't know, food, movie, book, vacation, you name it. Something that jumps to mind that I might not know about you?
So probably my favorite activity is reading. If I'm going to choose to do something in my downtime, I'm reading. And I'm still, again, look at me, I'm a hold the book in my hand kind of guy and turn the pages. So I apologize for that. And then my favorite book right now, a book I would recommend to anyone and everyone, is a book by Friedrich Bachmann. It's called Beartown. It's actually set in Sweden, and it's about a hockey team and sexual assault. I won't say anything more to that, but it's so well done, and it's kind of fun to read the translation. It's all in English, but read the difference in words. And it's actually part of a trilogy, so once you love that book, and I promise you you'll love that book, you can read the other 2 books in the trilogy. But Friedrich Bachmann, Beartown.
Thanks, Dave. How about Jen, a favorite something?
Sure. I've been a movie buff my entire life. I think there's just something magical. I feel like there's this special place in my brain when I hear the opening of a movie, no matter what studio it is. It's that wonder and excitement of what story is going to unfold on screen. And I'll share one of my favorites from when I was a kid, and I'd have to say that's The Goonies. So any type of like adventure, especially surrounding kids who are, trying to overcome something and come out at the end victorious. I'm a sucker for that.
I love that. And the last part of the mind that we focus on is somebody's natural instincts, the cognitive part of our minds up there. And that's all about how did both of you, if you're starting a project there at work, what's the first thing you do? Where do you start? Where do you jump in? Some people start with information and research. Others just start with just sort of brainstorming and improving on it. There's not a right or some people start with a process. Some people like to build it and see it. How do both of you jump in? Jen, I'll start with you on that. If you start something, how do you jump in? What's your natural way of working?
Yeah, I'm definitely, I like to do my research, ask questions. I am a writer by trade. That's what I went to school for. I actually graduated with a degree in English. And so I have a passion for writing. And so for me, it really is putting things down on paper and trying to organize things. And I know there's people who love to draw and put together diagrams. I am definitely, it's all about the written word and just kind of organizing my thoughts. And then once I do that, then it's really that time to test things. And I love brainstorming with my team. And it's just so fun to watch ideas start at these small little seeds and watch everything build on each other to become this great thing that, would not have happened if you didn't have all the minds working together on it.
Fantastic. And I see that in you in our interactions, Jen. And Dave, how about you? How do you start? Where do you jump in?
I'm a talker, so I talk one-on-one. I don't love making lists. Jen's always the note taker if we're sitting in a meeting and will remind me of what my commitments were. But I tend to walk around and talk to people, and that's where I get my energy. That's where I get my my motivation to keep going. And again, that goes back to that cure personalis, care of the person. If what I'm working on can be personally exciting and for people, then I'm probably invested in it. If I'm working on tax rules or something like that, I'm probably not as excited about that. So
that's fantastic. Thanks for sharing. I learned a little bit, some new things on both of you with those questions, and I'm sure it helps Jason get to know you as well. Well, let's wrap up. We call it sort of level up. What have we heard? And I'm going to start with, and Jason, you can jump in here. That cure personalis, you started there, Dave, and that jumped out at me. Just like I don't know if I've heard you use that phrase before, but in a way, it makes me think the work you're both doing and your leadership team and every member of Myron there, it's almost like you're working on finding the cure to making really good culture and good people stuff there. And what I've heard is all about caring people, thoughtful about talent, and finding people that really care and really are driven to do the good work you're trying to do. And then part of that cure is your living values and how it's the part of the language and everything you're going there. I've heard mules as part of that cure, innovation teams as part of that, ERP, this ally program. And then, one thing I learned when I first worked with you is this whole build like a girl and looking for talent in new ways. And that always has touched me. And when I see the pictures, when those come up every year, I'm amazed at the work that way. Anything that jumped out at you, Jason, other than those things when I think of what I heard today?
Those are brilliant, Sean. The other one for me that's going to stick with me to the day that I died, no pun intended here with this statement, but this was from Jen. Weddings are optional. Funerals are mandatory. I never heard that before. And I think that's a beautiful sentiment of how we should see each other in the workplace, that we need to be there for each other, even when things get tough. And that's the stuff that makes things really gritty, that makes folks resilient, that makes teams resilient, that strengthens those bonds and makes you realize that, yeah, you do work at work, but there's this whole other side of it too. There's this whole human aspect where you're connecting with people on a real level. And when you have that type of a culture where you know that if you lose someone extremely close to you in one of the hardest moments of your life, that you can count on and depend on your team at work to be there for you, that's powerful. That's going to stick with me.
Thanks, Jason. Jen, Dave, thank you so much for joining us today on Humanscape. It's been great to talk with you and learn more about what you're doing, as well as the successes over the last few years here. Jason, anything else before we let them go back into that new office space and digging deep? I'm sure they both have things to dig deep on today.
I think so. I think Jen's going to go do some origami. I think Dave's going to do some ballroom dancing. So we don't want to keep them from those hidden talents and skills. But as we wrap up here, we just want to thank our listeners for tuning in again today with Humanscape with Jen Bauer and Dave Walsh of Myron Construction and Sean Golias, our founder at HumanWorks 8, and Jason Cochran. Thank you so much for tuning in. And remember, you can find the episodes on Spotify, on Apple, wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also just go to our website, humanworks8.com/podcast, and find all the episodes there. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.
Change is inevitable. Growth is optional. Now it's up to you. See you next time.